driving examiners were sort of on a par with sort of policemen and all that kind of stuff. They were in a position of authority, and they're that last line of defence to keep the road safe. And you'd see the driving examiner sort of in town or whatever, and you go, "Oh, that's the driving examiner," and you'd be, and it's I think it's the same with a lot of things in society. I don't think it's got the same respect as it used to have.
How do we keep the industry at the forefront of everybody's minds so they do realise it's a profession, it's a skill, and it's something you're proud to be a part of? Because I'm very proud, similar to yourself. I think I've worked in this industry for 40 years, and I'm really proud to do the job I do now because it's an industry that I think is essential to every day.
And I think they still probably see transport and logistics as being a bit of an unskilled job, where that's far from the truth. And I think the National Bootcamp address that.
This is an industry that is, I think, on the front edge of adopting latest technology. There's no gear sticks anymore in the truck,
No,
it's forward and backwards. I remember when I started in this industry, there was a big thing in the middle which was the gear stick, and
I remember it well.
We double the clutch and all that sort of good stuff. I don't know, how do we get through how do we promote the industry better? Hello and welcome to Roadway, the podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Carl Hughes, and we're going to talk about driver training, the driver shortage, funding, third generation businesses, and everything else that goes along with that. So, welcome, Carl. Thank you very much for the time today.
Pleased to be here.
Let's start with the driver shortage. And I use the word shortage in an open-ended way because, the industry's running. There are roughly 550,000 vocational drivers that use their licence on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. There are roughly 550,000 commercial vehicles on the road. So allowing for holidays, allowing for absence, say 10% at any time, you would say there is a driver shortage. So not to cause panic or to people rushing out, but there's always a challenge around driver resource. So from your perspective, why have we got a shortage in such a professional industry which can give you a wonderful lifestyle? That's one point. And two, just give me your views on the driver shortage and how you've seen it evolve over the years that you've been involved in training.
Yeah, I would say that I've been involved in this for 25 odd years in transport, 23 years in training, and all of the time there's been talk of a driver shortage. And there's always been an aging demographic of drivers. With that comes ill health. We had all the Brexit a few years ago, which had an impact on the driver shortage. And I think really it's about getting the next generation of drivers on the road. There's barriers to that. But the key is just getting the next generation inspired, which is one of the reasons why we were partnering with the Generation Logistics. We're a partner with Generation Logistics, and they help advertise logistics as a career, not just for drivers, but for all kinds of careers within logistics. So that helps.
I mean, it's interesting. I'll just pick up and unpack a couple of points you made there, if that's okay. We did a report last year with Women in Transport, about intergenerational planning, it was called. And basically it was a year long, and we went into schools and colleges, went into transport, logistics businesses to understand, if you look at the workplace and there's 5 generations in it, I would suggest we politely are one of the more senior generations.
I would say so, yes.
You're in the process of, becoming a third generation business. So you have a younger generation coming into your business, which we'll talk about later. But the expectations from those generations are all different. And basically what the report says is the 2 youngest generations coming to the workplace want certain things. And one is job mobility. So they're not going to have a job for life. They're not going to have a career for life, per se, particularly.
Yeah.
And the one is freedom to flex within the week and their places of work. So they don't want to particularly work more than 8-hour shifts, and they don't particularly want to be on a rotated routine schedule. They want some flexibility and movability into it. And the other thing is they're not, particularly invested in anything that doesn't involve AI or social media or the modern technology. So against that backdrop, how do you think we can pick up from the point about Generation Logistics, who, like yourselves, we support, and we can see the value in that? Because I think it's important that as an industry we come together and have one vehicle, pardon the pun, to drive the perception. But actually, from a driver training perspective, is it just going to be a gateway into the industry? Is it just going to be a job that transitions every 2 or 3 years? How do you think it may change with that generational impact?
I think the driving role is a gateway into the industry, but I think depending on the person and their background, there's sometimes there's a role for everybody. You know, with people, to be a driver, you don't necessarily need to be. I mean, it's been increasingly so. You do need to be able to work a lot of IT, a lot of delivery notes, and all that is all done electronically now, and also the vehicle. So driving a truck now isn't sort of seen as the bottom rung of the ladder, really, because it's a responsible job. You've got you make mistakes as a driver, and there's consequences, not just for yourself, but for your employer and for your colleagues. So there's a lot of responsibility as a driver, but I think people take pride in the work, and they do a good job, and they keep everybody safe, and they can be proud of that.
Yeah, I think I'm always, when I'm in out and about, I'm always asked about driving, and to me it's a profession. You know, it is a profession, and I think sometimes if you go across the water into Europe, you know, a driver is viewed very differently. It is a profession, as is accountancy, as in the legal service. And one of the problems I think we face as a country, which hopefully generational logistics can help address, is there's a lack of awareness about the opportunity to make it into a career and progression. You know, and ultimately, yes, as people's expectations from the workplace changes, it's still a role that needs to be done, and you can earn a good living now by being a driver.
Yeah.
And I always quote the stat that, you know, driving a truck is as regulated as flying a plane, if not more so, because of the checks and the responsibility that sits on your shoulder. Do you think there's a problem, final point really on this one, about the perception from the public of driving, such as facilities and the ability to, you know, because the kit itself now is state of the art. If you look at IT, and you mentioned, you know, from a process perspective, the adoption of AI, this is an industry that is, I think, on the front edge of adopting latest technology. There's no gear sticks anymore in a truck, you know, it's a forward and backwards. I remember when I started in this industry, there was a big thing in the middle, which was the gear stick, and, you know,
I remember it well.
Double the clutch and all that sort of good stuff. I don't know, how do we get through how do we promote the industry better? You know, how can we do?
So, I mean, separate to generation logistics, I do career days at school sometimes, and that's really interesting because you talk to the kids and they haven't got a clue. They see the lorries, but they don't realise what's involved. And I think the more you can get out there in the mainstream media and publicise the role that they do. I mean, COVID was a real wake-up call for the nation when it came to drivers, and suddenly KFC had no chicken and all this kind of stuff, and the government sort of had to act because it suddenly people became aware with the social media and everything that there was this shortage, a lot of panic buying and all that kind of stuff. Even though we had plenty of everything, as soon as people start panicking, then things become short. But I think during COVID, they got a lot of recognition, similar to the NHS. People were grateful. They were waiting for the lorries to come and do the deliveries, you know, to get the stock, because they realised that the supermarket shelves were empty without the trucks. And I think I read a stat once that said something like, without trucks running for 3 or 4 days, the shelves will be empty. You know, no eggs, no bread, no, all of the short shelf life products will be gone. You know, and then it won't take long before the supply chain is so just in time now. All it takes is one glitch, or a combination of glitches, and it can all stop. But I think that's where the professionalism of the industry goes unnoticed, because people take it all for granted.
No, I agree, and I think, I mean, I always quote the stat that 98% of the food goes on a truck. You know, and it does, fact, you know, and, you know, 80% of all goods in this room will have been on a truck, probably a little bit more actually, or a van, or a coach, which is, well, the products will, or the people will, which is another area that we as the RHA represent. I think the professionalism is something that we, as I say, do take for granted, because just going back to the COVID, and I always make the point that, you know, the industry did get the recognition, and rightly so, where, you know, every Thursday afternoon, I think at 6 o'clock, everybody stood outside and applauded, rightly so, the great work of the NHS.
Yeah.
But they never clapped the truck driver. or the logistics infrastructure that kept everything in the country going. And it's like now the challenge we face today. At the time of recording, we are looking at challenge around the price of fuel. Again, it becomes an issue because people realize what might happen, and it might be around driving inflationary pressure from the cost now, or the fact that some work might not get done because people can't afford to do it. So it's really, how do we keep the industry at the forefront of everybody's minds so they do realize it's a profession, it's a skill, and it's something you're proud to be a part of? Because I'm very proud, similar to yourself. I've worked in this industry for 40 years, and I'm really proud to do the job I do now, because it's an industry that I think is essential to every day, and it's been a privilege to be challenging, but it's been a privilege to work in it. So it's really how we keep that. I'm going to move on slightly now, because just from a driver perspective as well, from your perception, and you're probably very well placed to answer this, is there a desire for people to become drivers? I mean, are you finding that people are kicking your door down to get a class 1? Or...
Yeah, I think there's certainly an appetite for people to become drivers, but I think the entry is the issue. You've got people that want to better their lives and they can earn a good wage being a driver, but at the moment they're not earning a good wage because they're not a driver, and it's bridging that gap so they can afford to be a driver, to get the skills to build their family and house and everything that they want to do. And that's the key thing with youngsters, because there's so many people now who are on minimum wage, 0 hours jobs, and they can't just get stuck in that cycle, and it's hard to break it. And the government boot camp, the national boot camp that we did after COVID, that really gave a good injection of some young blood into that. Going back to COVID, I'm trying to forget about COVID, but going back to COVID, people looked out their windows and the only things on the road were trucks.
Correct.
Cars weren't allowed out. There was emergency vehicles and trucks, and that was it. And I think a few of them took a look at themselves and thought, crumbs, if this carries on, how am I going to earn a living? And who is working? And lorry drivers are working. And they thought, well, I could do that, and then I can carry on earning, because I'm not earning now. I'm on furlough or whatever thing they're on.
It's a good point. I think we all default back to COVID, because that was the time when the country, and I use this word in a bracketed way, faced its last crisis, and as you quite rightly say, and you really summed it up well there, there's only a few things moving on the road. One was the police, the ambulance and the fire, and then the trucks. So we are an essential service, and it was the one that did keep the country moving. You've nicely wandered into funding, which I wanted to touch you around, and the boot camps, which have now, I think the last 6 months have really changed from being more of a national to regional focused, deciding on how the funding is going to be spent, and the challenge I see from that as a trade association, sitting above the 4 nations, is depending on the prominence of logistics in your region, you're going to prioritise it down. So, for example, if you're in a rural area, it might not be in the top 5. If you're in a tourism area, it certainly won't be in the top 5. But if you're in somewhere like the West Midlands, it probably will be in your top 5, because that's one of the hubs in the Golden Triangle going forward. So in terms of, and we spend a lot of time talking to the government about funding and lobbying for more, and their position would always be, but it's got to be a partnership with industry. And industry has got to, invest in the future, etc., etc. And generally, from a career perspective, what's your thoughts around potentially what funding could or should look like? And these are your thoughts, what should it look like? So you're close.
So I think the regional boot camps, the numbers are quite low from what I've seen, and we've not really engaged with the regional boot camps because it's been a bit too piecemeal. I think regional authorities have gone for more sexy boot camps. They put money into cyber security and all this sort of coding and all that kind of stuff, try and bring high-tech jobs in. And I think they still probably see transport and logistics as being a bit of an unskilled job, where that's far from the truth. And I think the national boot camp addressed that, because they didn't just give them the license through that, but we had a guided learning throughout the boot camp, which we were able to teach them about driver's hours and tachographs and regulations and safe loading and all that kind of stuff. So when they came to be employed in their first job as a driver, they got a head start with it, and I think that worked well. But I think in terms of funding, you've got HGV apprenticeships out there, which serve a purpose. They're a good thing for the big companies, the big parcel companies, the DHLs of this world, Kalina Group, all that kind of people, because they've got the infrastructure there to be able to keep somebody gainfully employed while they're partaking in the apprenticeship. Whereas if you've got a traditional transport company that's just running lorries, it's very difficult to get a 12-month or maybe 9 months, I think 8 or 9 months with the shorter apprenticeships now, employed as a driving apprentice, where they're basically a driver's mate for that period of time. I think that would be quite, the cost of that can outweigh the gain of the apprenticeship. So I think the apprenticeship levy needs spending differently. We know it's not getting spent. I think up to 2023, £3.3 billion have been returned to the Treasury of unspent levy funding. That is such a waste and a missed opportunity to increase the skills in the workforce. Everybody needs more skilled people, whether it be driving in transport, office, clerical, accounting, marketing. Increasing skills make these businesses better, and wasting that levy pot and just giving the money back to the Treasury, I think it's not right. And I think policy wise, I think the government should look at releasing that levy pot for approved accredited training courses for businesses to spend on what they want without having to commit to a full 9, 12, 18 month, 2-year apprenticeship, depending on what the role is. I think we could get some quick gains. I think transport companies in particular are struggling. They've got razor thin margins. The cost of fuel is there all the time. Even things like accredited driver CPC training could be used. They could use the levy funding for that to release a bit of the burden. And a lot of transport companies still use agency drivers, and agency drivers have got a part to play in the industry. But I feel sometimes there's an opportunity there where the companies could take that money that they pay the agency and they could use that to train their own drivers, and then they'd have loyalty, they'd have somebody new that they could shape to the new way of working. The thing with a lot of drivers who have been doing it a long time, that some of them don't particularly like change, and they like to tell you how they want to do it. And you'll have seen that. And I think if you get somebody and give them an opportunity, people are generally quite grateful and they're willing to put in a shift and show that.
And particularly going back to the intergenerational piece, if you know, I think one of the big challenges in any workplace, and the RHA is an example where we've got all 5 of those generations in the workplace. I'm sure your business is the same.
Yeah.
You know, you have to know how to engage, you know, and show appreciation, what actually drives people, you know, and I passionately believe that there's drivers out there, you know, for example, we just need to engage with them and promote it and package it in a way that appeals to what they're looking for. You know, I think. Just in terms of, and again, I read an article very recently about, we're just going to change the subject slightly now, Carl, DVSA, who are struggling with car test backlogs and waiting times, which is a big challenge, you know, particularly in your game and your line of work, and if we're trying to bring people into the industry. So are you seeing a similar trend in vocational test availability, and what impact is that having on you and your business? Not particularly financially, I'm talking about is there a bottleneck, is there a backlog, or are you not seeing similar problems to a car driver?
I think what happened, after COVID with the testing, we were struggling for driving examiners, and the military actually stepped in and helped doing HGV driving tests to keep it all rolling, because obviously with the driver shortage and everything else, it all made sense. And then as time's gone on and that softened, the public are not very happy about not being able to get car tests, quite rightly, because it's a barrier to work again. If you've got people there who need a car license to go and get a job and work and travel, and they can't get a test. And so what they've been doing to try and bring that backlog down is taking people from HGV driving tests to do car driving tests. And in different areas and different regions, it's very different. But definitely, there's certain areas of the country where the business is stifled because we're not able to grow, and having a shortage of a resource like driving tests makes the admin burden on the business so much more. But I feel for the DVSA. It's a very it's a legacy organisation, and the management there, and even Loveday Ryder, who was there before, they work really hard to engage with industry, and they're doing their best, but they can't recruit enough driving examiners. And I believe the reason for that is they don't pay them enough. I mean, the starting wage for a driving examiner is less than £30,000. It's 29,000 something plus regional benefits. And I remember when I was young, showing my age now, the driving examiners were sort of on a par with sort of policemen and all that kind of stuff. They were in a position of authority, and they're that last line of defence to keep the road safe. And you'd see the driving examiner sort of in town or whatever, and they go, "Oh, that's the driving examiner," you know, and you'd be, and it's I think it's the same with a lot of things in society. I don't think it's got the same respect as it used to have. I think the driving examiners, they do a good job. The pay isn't particularly great, especially depending on where they live and the base salary. I mean, they get other benefits. They've got a very good civil service pension, good holidays, etc., etc. But at the same time, people need to earn a living, and I think we need. Personally, I think we should charge more for the driving tests. I think for the car driving test in particular, people are paying £200 or £300 sometimes from these driving test resellers. The lorry driving test is £115 now, and I think increasing or maybe even doubling the cost of that driving test for them to be able to invest more in examiners' salaries and recruitment. I think adding another £85 on the cost of a driving course that can cost thousands, they'd be willing to do that just to get a better test, if you like.
I mean, that's really good, because I mean, obviously, like yourself, you know, we work very closely with DVSA, you know, and DVLA, obviously, and I agree with the comments. You know, there's some really there's a lot of effort, you know, and you know,
100%.
The whole infrastructure and actually around this industry needs to be reviewed. The Traffic Commissioner's Office is another example. You know, it needs to be reviewed, and it's got to be relevant going forward for a professional industry. And it comes back to that word again about your definition of profession. Because ultimately, to people coming into this industry, I can see why they don't see that. We have challenges around facilities, we have challenges around, you know, pay levels, we have, as other sectors do, but ultimately we need to, going back to your point, which was a really good picture in my mind about COVID, there's only four types of vehicles running around on those roads, and we were one of them as trucks, you know, so exactly. It is essential, and it is something that you pay the essential wage. And I think we're as young as each other, because I do remember exactly what you described. And I also remember talking about technology. When I used to send the fleet down the road, they had a bag of 5p's to either stop and make a phone call in a payphone, or they used to knock on a police station's office and use the public phone that you could use there in case of emergencies. And that was communication. It was. You know? And our times change, you know, to go forward.
Yeah, I remember doing, I was on the road doing my deliveries. You'd get into a new town and you'd stop at the first petrol station you come to and buy an A to Z of that town, and before you know it, you'd have a box of A to Zs on your bunk. I've still got them.
I have as well, and they're fantastic, and they're all marked and everything else. They're good. So moving on, that's a nice segue into the last part. I just want to talk to you about, Carl, because obviously you're moving into a third generation business. Your son Michael is working with you, picking up the reins, whatever you're transitioning across to the next generation of Hughes in training. So just talk to me a little bit about, from your perspective, I mean, you're also very proud of what you've achieved, and rightly so. And having come to see, I think it was about a year ago, I can see how proud Michael is of picking up the reins and continuing, you know. And just talk to me about the challenges of a family business in this day and age going forward, and you know, and what that means to you and the family, and how you are going about that, if that makes sense.
Yep. So my dad started the business in the late 80s. He was a lorry driver. He started off doing it part-time. He decided that getting up at silly o'clock in the morning was not for him for the rest of his life. So he carried on driving. He used to work for Fred Sherwood Group, did more than 20 years for them, great company. And we still do their training. They have
a very good truck stop at Junction 23.
That's right.
It's a very good truck stop. I was there only a few weeks ago.
They'd have looked after you well there.
They did. I was doing that, funny enough, we digress slightly, but it is relevant. I was doing a podcast with Commercial Motors. They call it Grilled in the Calf, and they give me a choice of where to do it. I thought we'll go there, because they do actually a very nice breakfast as well.
Yeah,
so it's good.
The old man Alan, I went to see them a couple of years ago, and the whole family came round and invited my dad back, and we all had a big slap-up breakfast, and it was lovely.
Well, that's some of the industry, though. That's actually some of the industry that, it's a very proud, professional, entrepreneurial industry. We sometimes, I don't think we tell people just how good we are at what we do, as well. I interrupted you totally there, Carl. So
I think the perception for driving in the industry is key. I think the general public don't generally understand. They just see the lorries and they just think, oh, it's just driving, he's just steering it. It's not a big thing. But when you actually go into it, it's a well-paid, responsible job, and it is a career. You can move on to all different things from it. But in terms of the family business, so you've got different generations with different values. So my dad just wanted to be in control of his own destiny, so he wanted his own truck. Very proud to have his name on the truck, and even the way you got work back then in the 80s and 90s was you'd get an advert in the yellow pages. And then I joined my dad. I was a transport manager before that, and I joined my dad in 2003, and then that was the advent of Google and websites and all that stuff. So I brought that in, and we was able to grow the business through that. And then 4 years ago, Michael joined me. So we run the business together. He's a director also, and we've kicked on to the next stage now. We do all the Carl Hughes bus training for the Ministry of Defence. We train in the defence in Cyprus. We're the national training provider for lots and lots of the big national companies, and we're the biggest HGV training company in the UK, and we're the DVSA's biggest customer on driving tests in the whole country. And
so how many did you do a year, just out of curiosity? How many tests did you do last year? You might not know that. I've just put
no, I don't know. Michael would know.
Yeah, it's many. I mean, I know when I came to see you about, I think it must be maybe 2 years ago now, actually.
Yeah.
A while ago, it was, it's significant what you do, and therefore, when you look at the industry, I mean, you are an essential part of the industry, because without you, people don't drive trucks.
Yeah.
And I think you can tell from the standard as well, because obviously we work with you guys as well, that you have is commendable. It is commendable. It's from a third generation, and it was nice to see Michael's enthusiasm and passion to go.
Oh, the thing with the bringing the next generation in, they've got the energy that I used to have when I was that age. They've got the ideas that I used to have, and you mold that with my experience and balance, and it's a great combination. It works really well, I've got to say.
And here we are doing a podcast. You say, so we go again, don't we, into their generation.
But we don't forget the legacy. On just a short story on social media. There was a guy put a photo on yesterday on this Facebook group of hauliers, Leicestershire hauliers or whatever, and he's put a photo on. This is the lorry I passed my test in 1995, and it was with Bill Hughes, and it was great, and I did this and I did that, and then next thing, these are all these other people. I passed my test with Bill, and that was obviously. My dad came round for dinner yesterday, and I showed him them all, and he was pleased as punch with it. Oh, I am trying to place that person, and somebody else said, oh, I used to work with Bill on the tippers and this kind of stuff, and it's that kind of stuff. It makes you so proud. I mean, even when I used to do the training myself, I'd be driving around Leicester or Northampton or Nottingham teaching people on their driving lessons, and you'd get lorries coming the other way, flashing and waving at you because they passed the test with you. It's a small world.
No, it's fantastic, and I think that's the thing about this industry. Whilst its impact is high, it's actually quite small. You know, if you're working for a period of time, you see a lot of people, and you see them again, see them again, sometimes in different roles and configurations. And, I'm an example of that, where I've worked in the industry now, I'm obviously the MD of the RHA, but there's that passion and that desire there to do a good job. And I always think it's to do a good job, and the challenge will come your way. And every day will be a challenge. You'll know from your operational, you'll know now from running a business. But we overcome it as an industry. I think that's the important part. Carl, really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. And I think to summarise what we're saying, there is a constant driver shortage.
We need to keep the conveyor belt going. Top it up as people fall off. That's
funding wise, the government needs to think, as does industry, about making it more accessible, because 85% of this industry are SMEs with less than 15 trucks.
Yeah.
And whilst some larger organisations with back offices, with warehouses, where etc. can use the current structure. The majority can't, of businesses. So we need to think about keeping that, because the smaller operations are integrated into the larger ones as part of the supply chain. So they're just as important, and they should not be forgotten. And from a resource perspective, the government impacts this directly and indirectly from their own structure, DVSA being the case, if there's enough examiners or not, and they need to probably, in conjunction with us, align themselves to this professionalism. Because if you're going to work for the government in this sector, you should be proud it's a profession. It's not just a stopgap to go somewhere. And then finally, it's great to see a family business going from strength to strength in this challenging environment. So congratulations to you and Michael, and to Bill on that one as well. And thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate
it. Thank you very much.